have to speak. You get up, you introduce the people, you bring the presiding officer up, you shut your mouth, you sit.
But somebody needs to take roll.
Yes.
Because I had one of my students at Berkeley, I don't know if you guys, she was in the wrong chamber and didn't know it.
Oh dear.
No.
And they didn't have placards like we have.
Yes.
And so it took us after the first session to go and figure out that she was in the wrong chamber, and so yeah, it was a big mess.
Oh,
So I do say that the parliamentarian should at least take roll and make sure that everybody who's there is supposed to be there and vote.
There's a set of things that the parliamentarian is supposed to do. It's in the NFL events guide. There's a checklist, and at nationals we had to go through the checklist. We got in trouble if we did not go through the checklist.
It's a lot like setting up a good student teacher. You give them the introduction and you get out of their way.
Yeah. You get up, you do the pledge, you administer the oath, although at nationals they did it in mass at the opening ceremony. They administered the oath. You give the pledge, you do, you set the calendar, no, you elect a presiding officer, then the presiding officer comes up and sets the calendar. Before you do anything, when they get to the room, you make sure everybody who's supposed to be there is there. You issue the placards so that they can have their name, because you get a name placard, a piece of paper folded in half with the name and the school. And you use that for recognition in the round. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The oath of office.
I solemnly swear to my heart, soul,
Uphold
the
and
NFL, I
uphold
will
and defend.
go
No,
approved NFL colleges.
No. Thanks, Joel. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and so on and so forth. Yes, they give that. It was actually very cool to watch 500 kids stand up in unison and recite that oath with the hand up.
And a little scary.
With who's there was a little scary. No, that was very good.
It might also be a little scary.
No, it was very cool. Here we are. Okay, I can see.
And
I can see. I have far too many revolutionaries.
The opposing sides of politics.
All right. So let's talk for a minute about. So we talked about the field and where we play. Okay, we get in a room. The kids sit in the middle. They are the members. The members control what happens. They write the topics. Ball. Okay, what we play with. There are two types of legislation that you will find in that packet that I gave you. There is resolution and a bill, and they are distinctly different. The resolution is not a binding document. It is a statement of philosophy or belief. We as a chamber declare this to be true. Okay? We believe that this is something that should happen. It usually addresses issues that are outside Congress's control. Obviously, if Congress can control it, if it's within Congress's constitutional rights, they would write a bill and write the law. But if they're addressing something that the executive branch is doing, or something that the judicial branch is doing that they don't appreciate or like, they will deal with it. Usually, a lot of times you'll see resolutions about foreign countries. Okay? Department of State. They want the Department of State to take a certain stand. Department of State is under the chief executive. Okay? It's not in the control of Congress. What makes it easy to tell that you're working with a resolution is that there are whereas clauses at the top. If you take a look at your legislative packet,
The first one.
the very first one should be a resolution.
The send government credit, is that what we're looking at?
No. Resolution to repeal the don't ask, don't tell
That was
policy.
my story.
A. Yeah, there's one of
We
these.
got passed after.
This is also a resolution, but it's a
But they did
specific
good
kind.
work.
And we'll
Yeah.
talk about
It
that.
was really good.
Okay, so yeah, the resolution to repeal the don't ask, don't tell policy. Ah, it's from Auburn. Yes, it's from Diane School. I felt so bad for you folks. You put this in the packet, and then Congress passed the
I
repeal.
know, and it's like, you know what some of the kids did? I think it was at Nat Qualls even. They all huddled together, they all said, we're going to go in there, and we're going to pretend that it didn't pass, and we're going to debate it as if it hasn't passed yet, and they debated it.
Absolutely.
So they can decide to do that, but yeah, that was kind of just...
Again, that's a beautiful example of the members deciding what they want to do. Okay? Congress is unique in the sense that we have these rules. The rules can change.
They can be
Mid-round.
suspended.
The students can rise, and if 2/3 of them agree, they can suspend a particular rule. Rule says questioning can only go for a minute. They decide this speaker, we've got some more questions for. There's a lot of us want to question him. I move to suspend the rules to allow an additional minute to extend questioning by 1 minute. 2/3 say yes, we go on. Okay.
That's why it's
Stuff
not
like
like
that
4 hours.
Yeah, well, there's a fixed amount of time, and so you actually have to be careful. Because we say the session's 3 hours long. From the time we begin to the time we end, 3 hours. We drop dead at 3 hours to keep the tournament on time. Okay. So if you're allowing kids to extend debate on all these different things, you're having fewer speakers per hour. Okay, so there's a balance there. The kids try to strike.
And they can vote, John, correct me if I'm wrong, they can vote to suspend some rules, but there are
Yeah,
some.
there are some they can't.
Because I remember there were some tournaments last year where we were sitting in the judges' lounge, somebody came in and said, Congress just voted to end end their session.
Yeah,
and
no.
like they had, after like 45 minutes, and they were like, we're done! And like, no, you at least have to meet a certain
Yeah.
amount of time. Yeah.
You have to have a minimum amount of debate.
Yeah.
And it has to be equal across all the sessions. You got to give everybody the same amount of time. So, all right. Bills. They become laws. Okay, we all remember Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah.
I'm just a bill. All right. They're very specific. They have. These are actually going to be how this policy is going to be implemented, not just simply. What the statement of philosophy is. I'm looking for if
E
somebody
would
has
be the first one. I
E's the
believe.
first one.
E from Eastside Catholic.
That probably.
A bill to add
It's the
saliva to the
salvia.
norm to
Yeah,
control.
salvia divinorum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Saliva.
Salvia. Yes, saliva divinorum.
Saliva divinorum.
Yeah.
It's the salvia bill.
Anyway, the salvia bill. This is a good example. It's got the 5 standard sections. Okay, what are we doing? Adding additional definitions in section 2. Okay, explaining it in more detail. Section 3 is enforcement. Section 4 is the timeline to implementation. Section 5 is always included. It basically says anything that we weren't thinking about when we wrote this bill is now null and void.
Do you have to always have 5 sections in a bill?
According to the national template, yes.
Oh,
It's
okay.
these 5 sections. Sometimes you'll see bills that have like 12 sections to them. There was one last year on traffic laws, I think it was, that was 12 sections long. Legislation is written by the students. You will find typographical errors. We try to catch them in committee, but we don't always get there. You will find language errors. You will find sections misnumbered. 1, 3, 5, 2, 6. As it goes down the list, you go, what are you doing? Things happen. That's all I can say. The beauty of Congress is you get what you get and you deal with it. If the chamber decides that the language is so poorly written that it cannot possibly be implemented, that is a reason to negate. And it's a legitimate reason to argue on the opposition. It's like, this bill needs to be fixed. And we have things called amendments for doing that, which we will talk about a little later. Okay. So the difference between resolutions and bills. There's a very specific kind of a resolution, and I put a version in there on accident. A resolution to rescind government credit, which amends the Constitution. A resolution is a statement of belief. If Congress passes an amendment to the Constitution, it does not become law. It is referred instead to the state's legislature or to the constitutional conventions of the various states, however each state wants to deal with it. In this case, it specifically amends Article 1, Section 8 to remove the statement giving Congress the authority
Is
to
this
borrow
in our
money and
document?
credit to
It's
the
the-
U.S.
It's like
an
the third
additional
page
page.
in, yeah,
Oh, okay.
from the front.
It's like the 3rd page or so in. This is in there by accident. This is one of the ones my team's submitting for this next week. So, you get a little sneak preview at our
So what was your point on this one?
point on this one is an example of a constitutional amendment.
Oh.
Okay, this is how you would write an amendment to the Constitution. You have your whereases explaining why this is needed. You have a resolved statement that reads exactly like it's written there. And this is straight off the Nationals template. By 2/3 of the Congress here assembled that the following article proposed as an amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and so on and so forth. Okay, that is required language. Then it follows with the article, and I numbered it Article 28 as in it would be the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. And then we added that. So,
Let me understand something here.
yes.
You're proposing that the government function without a credit base.
Yeah.
Just checking.
Cash only.
This should be hysterical.
Yeah.
Well,
Notice,
there's
bills
room
aren't-
for
You
debate.
don't want to write a bill that is so one-sided, that is so obviously good or bad, that there is no room to argue it. The committee will actually toss those usually. They
Yeah.
don't even make it to the packet. I wrote one, actually not I wrote one, my team wrote one, I submitted one, I helped them write it, to have the Civil Air Patrol enhance the border security by doing flights over the borders and looking for immigrants.
You're talking about
Illegal
16-year-olds?
No, CIP pilots are 21.
Oh, okay.
But the flight crews are, they go all the way up. But much cheaper than a Predator drone, like infinitely cheaper. The bill ended up being so obviously a good idea that the committee said, there's no room for debate, we're chucking this. So
So
things
the
like
bill
that happen.
stimulates debate. It isn't necessarily airtight and awesome. It's,
No, and in fact, some of the
it
best
should get you
ones
going.
have a lot of room for debate on both sides. You
Yeah.
want to find
Mhm.
something fairly controversial that's interesting.
Well, it's not like
That's
in,
cool.
in
So-
policy or something where you propose your plan and then you want to defend it. In this case, I mean, you write it,
Yeah.
but that, it doesn't mean you go, it doesn't get you a win
No.
just because you wrote it, whereas you have to defend it.
No, but
Because it'll play out differently in every chamber, every session will be different. The
Every
agreement in
single-
combat was a good example last year,
Yeah.
and one that was controversial and had a lot of room for debate.
Yeah.
And had judges sufficiently upset with occasional students to threaten having them removed from the chamber.
not
More
yours.
than
Little
once.
sexism,
Huh?
little sexism.
Well, we had a situation where this is one of those where kids got completely out of control. We had a situation where there were two bills that were very controversial. One was women in combat, and the other was sex ed, universal sex ed. And we had both of them in this same chamber one afternoon with some unfortunate performers. And we had one kid who just doesn't have a real good understanding of social interaction, and so tends to present inappropriately.
I have one of those.
And it's not unusual for him to do that. So the judges in the room knew that. We know this kid. We've seen him before. We're like, okay, so there'll be some issues around that, but there always are, and that's not a big deal. Except that somebody chose to sort of bounce off that and run with it. And at one point we had a senator standing up and asking another senator whose command of English is normally very good, but who lost all semblance of English in the response. If he was advocating sex ed, and the student was saying, so if you will you be teaching every position, and the kid kind of looked at him and he said, so you can't speak on something you're an expert on. So if you had sex, and the kid up front goes, we don't have no sex. I mean, he just lost all the English.
It all went.
It all went. He's from China, and all of his English went, and it was first year English again. Me no have no sex. You know, I mean, the parliamentarian was Donna, and I was one of the two judges, and Fitzgerald was one of the other two judges. I don't remember the third guy, but Fitz and I like went, okay, which one of us is going to tackle this guy? The transgressor, not the poor kid who was having trouble breathing at the front of the room. Donna almost did something, and I think it was Kyle that was PO at that point. And Kyle said, debate is done. You can sit down now.
Yeah.
That was it. We're done.
So you're dependent at that point upon a good PO and a good parliamentarian to really take control of the chamber, as opposed to, you know, the best thing about Congress being the students run the chamber, the worst thing about Congress being
The students
run
run
the
the
chamber.
chamber.
Well,
Yeah.
it is
And
really
national-
the inmates running the asylum.
Yeah.
And
And that-
Nationals, a student asked an inappropriate question. I can't remember exactly the wording right now, but right away the parliamentarian didn't even.
Shut it down.
She just said, I will not let that
PO says
question,
no.
yeah, we won't let that question be answered. But I think that we had a very good PO, and I think he would have done the same thing, but the parliamentarian just stepped
Oh,
right in.
the only reason Donna and I didn't shut this kid down entirely was because Kyle beat us to it.
Yeah. And that's we have lots of lots of strong presiding officers in our district as well as in our state. It's really neat to see. So kind of moving on a little bit. Let's talk about how we get things started. Diane mentioned earlier roll call. You'll see it's right here in my list of things that must be done. We get a seating chart. The kids must sit in their seat. They can't swap around. There's a reason for that. The students are actually separated physically from other students from their own school. Okay, there has to be at least a full desk separation between them, unless the numbers don't allow it. But
Like you said, Catholics there.
or Newport.
Or Newport.
There you go.
So when we bring our whole team, we bring 30 Congress people, so it kind of fills things up. But the seating chart is set up so that the kids can't, as much as possible, collaborate with their own school about what they want to do. They have to do that outside. Students can pass notes back and forth in Congress, perfectly acceptable. It is acceptable for a student to get out of their chair and go over and get something else in the middle of a round. We have some traditions in this state where we require that you get permission before entering the well area where people speak. But other than that, it's just basically pretty free form. People who are spectators can come and go. They just walk in and out of the room. We generally like to wait until somebody's done speaking, but it's not required. It's very much like the regular Congress. You have to make sure that you have a quorum. You have to have enough people. It's at least one more than a majority. One more than 50%, sorry. A majority of the members must be present. If you have 13 people in the chamber, you have to have 7 in the room. Okay? Then you can begin debate. Other people walk in late, sorry. You've missed out on a speech. You've missed out on setting the calendar. You've missed out on all kinds of other things.
A whole
So
bill.
you have to make sure that you're there on time for Congress. It's very important. We take roll, make sure everybody's in their seats. We make sure that the people are in the room they're supposed to be there. We then set the calendar. There are no rules for how the calendar is set. Calendar, by the way, is, you'll hear some people refer to the docket, incorrectly referring to what you debate in the room. This is the docket, okay? The list of all the possible pieces of legislation that could be debated during a given spring or fall season. The calendar is the subset of legislation that is going to be debated in this session, okay? That's your calendar, also sometimes referred to as an agenda. I learned something very cool at the national tournament. This was very nice. Students can propose a stack of legislation to be debated in a certain order, and just propose that, and if everybody agrees, that's the calendar. We do things a little differently here in the state of Washington. We give every school a chance to put one item on the calendar, and we usually draw random numbers out of a hat to determine which school gets to set it first, second, third, and so on. I've seen other tournaments where they say who drove the furthest. They get to put the first item on the calendar.
I've seen
And
that done.
I hate that, because if my team's the one who's traveled the furthest, we may not want to speak first. Our strategy may be that we want to work later in the session. Now we're stuck with our legislation at the top. See, authoring legislation gives you another advantage, a guaranteed speech. Anytime your legislation is raised on the calendar, your school has the option of guaranteeing that they can have a speech. You'll see later when we talk about recency why that's important. There's a lot of different ways the calendar will be set. Most importantly, listen really carefully. Students, they have to listen and understand what's going on. Ask questions if they don't understand. Okay? We have a standing rule in all of Congress. It's an unwritten law. It's an unwritten rule, but it's generally widely accepted. Silence is consent. If you sit there and do nothing in a Congress round, you have consented to the will of the majority. If you have something that you object to, you must stand up and object. So that's the real key, is telling the kids, you've got to listen. If you don't understand what's going on, don't just accept it, because then you're bound to whatever's happening. You ask the questions, stand up, get recognized, ask your question. Okay, so we set the calendar. Presiding officer election. Process occurs where people nominate themselves or each other to be presiding officer. Presiding officer in the state of Washington serves typically for 1 hour. At the national tournaments, they serve for one session. So if the session is 3 hours, they serve for all 3 hours. Yep.
We didn't do that. I think we changed every hour.
At nationals,
I'm pretty sure we did.
national rule is 1 PO per session. If you changed every hour, that's a problem, because the rules have been rewritten so that recency isn't a problem. If you have one presiding officer for the session, we don't care what speeches that they won't have a chance to give speeches, so recency doesn't matter. It was to simplify the process.
Maybe not. Okay.
Yep.
Maybe I'm misremembering that.
Yeah, it was one of the things they drilled into us before we started, because it's a major change to the rules over the last couple of years. So those things happen. The parliamentarian does all of this, except for setting the calendar. I got these two out of order. Presiding officer is elected, then the presiding officer leads setting the calendar, and that gets taken care of. I should mention one other thing on setting the calendar. At the state tournament, the spring packet is used. A committee representing each district, so one student representing each district, comes and meets at Federal Way High School prior to the tournament, and they set the calendar for the entire state prelim, for all 4 prelim sessions, or all 3 prelim sessions, whatever it is. I think there's 4. Anyway, and then that has to be debated in that order. Okay, so how do we know who gets to talk? So like in LD debate, the affirmative speaks first, right? And in policy debate, the affirmative speaks first, and in public forum, it's either or, okay? In Congress, the sponsor or author must speak first. We cannot begin debate with a negative speech. Okay? Somebody has to introduce the legislation. So first thing we do is we ask for the author. Okay? Did the person who wrote this thing, or a representative from their school, is considered the author? Is a member of the authoring school here? If so, they get the right to speak first. If nobody claims authorship, we then say, does anyone wish to sponsor the bill? That could be anybody from any school. Even, like, let's say the bill is from Newport, but my kids that are in that chamber all want to speak negative on the bill. Okay, they don't want, this particular group is all opposed to our own legislation. It happens all the time. Okay, we may choose not to be the author and simply relinquish, and somebody else can get up and give the first speech, and that's fine. But I have the right, first right of refusal. What happens if nobody wants to speak? Then the presiding officer